thank you for your patience and bearing with us as we waited for our final speaker. And I'd like to ask you all to take your seats and we'll get started. My name is Jennifer Layke. I'm the Director of Global Energy Programs at the World Resources Institute, and I'm the moderator for today's session. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to support the U.S. delegation and its official side event on U.S. climate action at all levels of government. We are truly honored to have with us today three excellent voices who range from a U.S. government official to a very renowned state expert in energy, and a business leader who has been working at the forefront of climate change in her own business. Our objective is to convey to all of you the importance of action at all levels of government and from all actors in our society. There's never been a more important moment for us all to focus on how government leadership can be augmented and increased in ambition as we move forward with the important efforts on climate change from Paris and beyond. So let me start by offering a few words about our three renowned speakers. And let me start first with Brian Deese. Brian is the Senior Advisor to the President of the United States. His duties include overseeing climate change, conservation, and energy policy. He advises the President on a range of both domestic and international issues, and he served as the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, where he helped oversee the development of the President's goals to deliver a smarter, more innovative, and more accountable government. Prior to OMB, he served as the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council and has had a long track record of focusing on clean manufacturing, clean energy, and economic development in the United States. We will ask him to provide the first comments, and I will also then turn to a set of questions that the panelists will respond to, and then we'll open it up. But before we do that, let me introduce our other two speakers for today. The second speaker that we'll be hearing from is Deborah Markowitz, who's the Secretary of the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, and has primary responsibility for protecting the environment, natural resources, and wildlife, and for maintaining Vermont's forests and state parks. She was named to this position in January of 2011, and Secretary Markowitz previously served as Vermont's Secretary of State. She has a distinguished career and working in public office, focused on a variety of important climate preparedness and resilience activities, as well as being on the boards of many organizations focused on clean energy and the transition to a climate-safe economy. And our third speaker is an executive, the Chief Sustainability Officer and Vice President of Kellogg Corporation. Diane Holdorf joined Kellogg in 2008 as the Senior Director for Environmental Stewardship and took on increasing levels of responsibility. From a VP role in environment, health, and safety, the Kellogg Company also recognized how important and strategic importance that climate change and environmental stewardship had for their company, and appointed her as in 2015 as their Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility, as well as their CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer. They have a variety of activities which we will discuss today in the area of food security, in areas around operational excellence, and she came to these roles with over 17 years of experience as a consultant in the health, safety, and environment world, as a consultant with Delta Consultants and various managerial consulting arrangements. She also, by the way, sits in my alma mater as an advisor to the University of Michigan's Graham Sustainable Institute. So I'm delighted to have a fellow Trojan fan on the board. So with that, let me turn over for opening remarks and comments on the importance of various levels of government pulling together and working on climate change in the United States. Brian.
Good. Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to be at here in Marrakesh in the first post-Paris COP. I was just coming from a meeting with a number of delegations of countries in what we'd refer to as the NDC Leadership Compact, which essentially is an effort by the US government to work with a number of countries, provide technical assistance and otherwise in supporting their own efforts to develop and deepen their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. And it was an important conversation because I think it's indicative of what is the entire thrust of this COP, which is countries have bought into this process. They are bearing down, they are focused on implementation, and they are asking themselves questions about how they can do more, how they can do it smarter, and how they can do it faster, and how they can be more ambitious, and are looking for new ways to partner in that effort. And I think that is, in some ways, the embodiment of what's going on writ large at this COP. Is a COP where the focus is on implementation, and you can see the degree of buy-in among countries around the world of varying circumstances into this process. At risk of being too short, I just want to say one thing very briefly about the U.S. context, and then turn over to our other panelists and then follow the conversation. And the one thing is this: rather than spending a bunch of time speaking about all of the different approaches that we've taken as a policy matter, I think it's worth just stepping back and taking stock of where we are right now in the U.S. economy, and as context for this conversation about how different actors work together. And I would just focus on one principal thing, which is that we are now currently in the United States living through the first sustained period where economic growth and carbon emissions have decoupled. They have broken apart. Since 2008, the economy has grown by 10%, as fast as any major developed country over that time period. And over that same period, carbon emissions have fallen in absolute terms by 9%, again, among the fastest of any developed country. And I think that one fact, that we are not just in a time of economic downturn, but over a sustained period, demonstrating that the economy can grow at a healthy pace, 15.5 million jobs created over the last 72 months, while seeing carbon emissions fall in an increasing trajectory, is perhaps a more important signal than anything else of the structural shift and the change in the market and the direction we've seen in the country. That also bears out in how we look toward the future. Even a couple of years ago, when the US government did its official projections of emissions, the projections were on an indefinite upward path. That has changed now. And when the government does its official projections, even of business as usual, projections of CO2 are now on a downward path. So that shift is projected to sustain over time. We've seen it across different sectors of our economy as well. Over that same period that I was talking about, the economy has grown 10%, but petroleum consumption has declined by 2%. The economy is growing, but we're finding ways to actually reduce the absolute amount of petroleum we're using. And likewise, total energy consumption is falling as well. This is not just a function of cleaner energy, it's that we're getting more efficient as a society too. And I start there, and rather than going into government policy and partnership, which I'd be happy to dive into, but I start there because I think that the principal takeaway from that is what we're about to hear from our two next speakers, which is that this structural shift and the trajectory being changed in the United States, where our economy is projected to continue to grow and carbon emissions projected to continue to fall is a function of the market, and it's a function of businesses making decisions and allocating capital in ways that they did not before, and that they are doing now, projected out into the future. And it's a function of creative and aggressive action at the state and local level that is going to sustain forward into the future as well. So with that as context, maybe that's a good tee up for our next ones, and I'd be happy to come back and delve into the policy questions as we go.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for your leadership. I'd like to turn now to Secretary Markowitz. So, Deb, would you please tell us a little bit clearly, states in the United States have led on climate change for decades.
States have taken leadership, and let me just pause for a moment. You know, this is a really great turnout for this workshop, and as I was seeing you all come in, I was thinking that you know, you're probably here for a couple reasons, and it's not just because we're so awesome. It's because you're probably deeply concerned right now about what the future is in the United States. Can I say that, right? I'm not going to say the name of the he who shall not be mentioned here, but we should give you comfort. And so you heard the introduction that put it in a more, you know, sort of a studied economic context. As a practical matter, though, we've been through this before, right? During the Bush administration, stepping out of Kyoto was a terrible disappointment, leading up then to Copenhagen, where we had this Republican Congress, so we couldn't just dive in and take leadership. During that time, there was a vacuum that was filled by states and local governments, our urban cities. And that's important, and that will be enduring. That's, I think, the glimmer of hope. At the same time, our economy really has transformed to a new clean energy economy. You're going to hear that. We've got incredible corporate leadership across the board, really. The biggest corporations, we are not turning back. And I would say in Vermont, a seminal moment was when 225 of our communities had infrastructure that was destroyed. 225 of 250 communities in the state of Vermont had infrastructure destroyed from a catastrophic storm that was climate induced. Okay, climate change is here. And those of us who are running states and are running cities know it's here and know we have an obligation to do two things. One is to protect our citizens from future impacts, and then to do our part to stop making it worse and to try to turn back the clock, or at least slow down what we know will continue to be a climate impact. And so as a consequence, leading up to Paris, states joined regions and provinces from around the world. 140 states, regions, provinces joined onto the Under 2 MOU. Now, of course, we want it to be 1.5, right? But this was in anticipation of the Under 2 conversation in Paris. And we feel like we made a meaningful impact on the conversation and the outcomes of the Paris negotiation. I don't know if you'd agree, but we're taking some credit, okay? And if nothing else, it gives us a psychological boost to really move forward with ambition. And in Vermont, for example, we're a small rural state. Right now, 1 out of 20 jobs in Vermont are in the solar industry. 1 out of 20. I mean, that's remarkable. And that's only I've been in this job for 6 years. That did not exist when I started, right? It was because we put in place tax incentives, we did some regulatory reform, and we had an economic model. So entrepreneurs could come in and deploy renewable energy in a way that made business sense. So the states will continue to lead. Perhaps a little later in the panel, I'll talk about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, and of course the Western Climate Initiative are two examples of carbon markets that have been tremendously successful and really have made a difference in our region, in both ramping down the greenhouse gases coming out of the electric sector, while also creating revenue that we could put into other energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction efforts. And perhaps that's enough to just to give you a sense of I guess of optimism that the United States is a federalist system, which means that the states have an awful lot of autonomy. And even with questions about things like the Clean Power Plan, which was part of our compliance, how we were thinking we were going to comply with the Paris Accord, even with that in some bit of question, states, the leading states, the states actually like California, who are one of the largest economies in the world, are doubling down on our commitment to getting this right and taking leadership. And it'll make economic sense. Other states are going to be coming along. I really truly believe it. And I think having leaders in our business community will put the right kind of counter pressure on so that we don't step back. We're not building new coal power plants, right? And it's not because of the Clean Power Plan. It's because it's not economic. Okay, the coal industry, as much as it's been promised that there's going to be coal jobs again, well, there's not going to be coal jobs if no one's buying the coal. So let's make that the goal.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Diane, let's turn it over to you. Kellogg and many other companies are taking on initiatives in their own operations, looking at their products and signing on to science-based targets. Over 200 companies have signed on for science-based targets. Tell us a little bit about your motivation and how, as a stakeholder, the policy context and the business context come together for your strategies.
Sure, thank you. As a US-based but global food company, the issues of food security and climate change are still urgent ones that we have to address as a business. And I speak for many of our peers when we understand that these are issues that will continue to drive decision-making and business strategy going forward. We've taken numerous steps along the years to help direct us on this path. We're currently on our second generation of sustainability commitments. Leading into Paris, we were part of that collective cross-sectoral action to help achieve the commitments. We were one of the first 10 companies actually to have approved science-based targets. We signed up beyond our 2020 commitments out to 2050, announced at Paris last year, to show solidarity for the governments who are bringing their NRDs to the table as well. And those commitments for us represent a 65% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in our own operations by 2050. And we're still one of the few companies who've extended that into scope 3 or into our supplier base, where we have a 50% reduction commitment, working together with our suppliers to find solutions oftentimes that don't yet exist for how we will help do our part to contribute across sectors to achieving the aggressive climate targets that we know are going to continue to be necessary. But commitments sound so last year. Right, that was Paris. What's Marrakesh? It's all focused on execution. What are we doing? What are we actually delivering to get there? Deb shared some great examples of what's happened at a state level, and I can assure you that at a business level, that work continues as well. Just a few quick examples. We're continuing to deliver against our own internal commitments to reduce energy, to increase alternative energy. We're turning on our second fuel cell solution for one of our plants in the US that's powering over 50% of Eggo waffles. Anybody out there love Eggo waffles? Alternative energy is helping to make those reality today as it is. We're continuing to look at a variety of other solutions through lighting initiatives, mileage reductions, solar opportunities across our entire business. For us, that extends beyond, however, into our supplier base. We've partnered with our suppliers and brought over 60% of our global suppliers into CDP supply chain to start their reporting along with our business so that we can get a valid baseline. What does that look like? And as a food company, agriculture is hugely important for us, both in the US and abroad. And so we're working together with farmers on conservation agricultural practices, leveraging really strong programs that the US government has enabled through USDA, like the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, to bring funding to bear to help change those practices that will preserve the environment while protecting yields and the livelihoods of our family farms around the country and around the world. So these are commitments that we are going to continue to execute against and deliver against. They make good business sense for us. These are issues not just of business continuity for us, but also how we look to collaborate and partner across sectors to really ensure that solutions bring the right kinds of livelihood results for those who are in our supply chain as well. So we're happy to share more examples as we get into our panel discussion.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to pause for a moment and take the moderator's prerogative, because we've heard from business, we've heard from a state agency, we've heard from our national government, and we haven't heard the voices from the cities. And I wanted to just say that around the United States, across the United States, city leadership and the urban agenda has really come to the fore in ways that we wouldn't have anticipated. 20 years ago, states were leading and cities were only becoming part of this dialogue. So at the subnational level, right now, we know that under the leadership of many mayors, they are tracking their emissions, they are looking for solutions, and they're acting on both their municipal building stock, on thinking through innovative urban planning initiatives, thinking through how to use PACE funding and other types of funding initiatives to take on the challenges associated with overcoming the lack of finance at the city level. And it is, in fact, part of the fabric of the American system that our government levels must work together. National government suggests building codes. The local communities have to implement those building codes. So we look to our local leaders and those organizations in the audience to tell us a little bit more when we open up about the local initiatives underway in the United States. So we'll return to that point in a minute. But let's open now around the context associated with the economic transformation. Each one of you addressed it in your comments. And in fact, one of the things that we know from where we stand is that this transition, as each of you has said, is underway. The decoupling in a state context around electricity, the ability to decouple economic growth and invest in new energy technologies. Tell us a little bit about where that agenda goes and how we think about the transition from an investment perspective that will be needed going forward.
Well, I'm happy to start and then turn it over. I think one of the things that is interesting, if you again look out a little bit farther along the horizon of the U.S. economy, and this is something that we will be addressing more fully in the mid-century strategy that the U.S. has developed, that was called for by the Paris Agreement, is that a lot of the focus in the current context is on the power sector. And we referenced the Clean Power Plan and the structure of the targets, but we also, I think, all referenced in different ways the underlying market momentum in the power sector because of supply and demand and price, and that over the last several years we've seen extraordinary reductions in price of renewables, and the levelized cost of wind and solar in many parts of the country is now competitive or lower than fossil alternatives, and natural gas has displaced a lot of coal in the power sector as well, and those trend lines are continuing. But I think that if you look a little bit farther out, one of the interesting challenges, both from a policy perspective but also an investment perspective, is to look at the other sectors that are going to be playing a role in contributing to reducing emissions in a way that benefits the economy. And I would just mention two. The first is in the land sector, and in the United States, increasingly, as the power sector drives toward cleaner sources, we're going to need to look to the land sector and better management of our lands as an opportunity, as a strategic opportunity, and their investment incentives are going to be key, and as well as a viable framework for measuring and accounting for emissions in that sector, so that people know what it is they're buying and what it is they're investing in. But I think that it's for the United States, it's not too early to start thinking about that, and also about the extraordinary economic opportunities that opens up for not just in agriculture for farmers and ranchers, but also in forestry, in wood products, and otherwise. That's something that we've worked on policy-wise at the federal level over the last several years. But there's a real opportunity to create a framework that would drive a lot of investment and investment that would get the United States ahead of the game in terms of where the next round of emissions reductions is going to be. So I think that that's one place where we really have an opportunity to think now about what the framework is 5, 10, 15 years down the road that will create investment and economic opportunity.
Yeah, I think that investment story, regardless of administration, is clearly something the United States is going to be focused on. But let's talk about that from the corporate side and with states. So, Diane, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, gladly. So we know that consumers are still going to care a lot about these issues. From a food company standpoint, we know that companies really care about, or sorry, that people really care about their food and what companies are doing about how it's grown, where it's grown, how it's made, and that there's enough for all. And these are issues that we care deeply about. So we are going to continue to expand the transparency of engaging consumers. We've got a great website. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called openforbreakfast.com. That's the US address. We actually have it in numerous countries. And it's a platform designed to connect with consumers on these very important issues of sustainability, health, community engagement, and our core heart and soul as a company and what we're doing about it, so that we can meet consumers where they are in wondering and asking questions. We answer a lot of questions there that come in, and we share a lot of information there. And one of the things that we share, just one, is the story of the farmers who are growing our foods and why these issues are important to them, why conservation agriculture is important to them, why water conservation is important to them. And interestingly, the most popular content on that site is the voice of the farmers. And that's something that farmers are asking for increasingly as well, because they want to have their stories heard, much to like what you were saying, Brian, and the actions that they're also already taken, because they feel like they're getting painted in not such a great light on these issues as well. So we are working to continue to engage that. We expanded our global purpose platform this year, Breakfast for Better Days, to be much more broad in response to the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, Sustainable Development Goal number 2 is around ensuring that there's enough food for all and addressing the issues of sustainable agriculture. So within that, we've continued to expand our work in delivering food to those who need it most, in serving kids in particular who are hungry. We work very closely with the US food banks and at the food school feeding programs in the US to ensure that they continue to have the infrastructure that they need to ensure that kids get the great start to their days. We've got a commitment to support 500,000 farmers around the world, including in the US, to address climate smart agricultural practices. We're going to engage our own employees in volunteer activities on these issues. But we're also going to bring over 3 million people along with us on this journey, because we know that people are going to continue to want to find outlets with companies and others who share their vision to take action. So these are ways that we will continue to invest and develop and grow along these issues. And we frankly see the consumer playing a very important part in continuing to drive that work for companies, except with companies like us as well.
So I'm going to talk about this from a slightly different angle, and it really, my message is that leadership matters, and what happens is you have leaders who send out sort of a hints to the market about where policy is going, where investment is going, where subsidies might be, and then you've got entrepreneurs who respond. And so we are, with this change, in the presidency, it's going to really come back to the state leadership to send out those market signals. And, we've, in Vermont, we have had this transformation to this clean energy economy. And it didn't happen just because businesses made a decision that they wanted to buy solar, or somebody decided they wanted to create a new solar company. It's because as government, we adopted a very bold goal for renewable energy, where by 2050, we're expecting to have 90% of our renewable energy, in state, right? It's actually 90% renewable by 2050, with 75% of it being from in-state. That's significant. And so that sent a market signal to lots of little businesses to say, okay, we've got to get in on this. And then at the same time, we put in place place a renewable portfolio standard. We put in if we've got a regulated utility industry, right? So although we've got private companies that are providing the power, we've got a regulatory board that sets the rates. So we gave an enhanced rate for renewable power up to a certain amount of power. And that's created growth in a whole sector. In parallel, we have, and this is, maybe if there's any auto manufacturers in the room, you're going to be grumpy about this example, but California set up some really ambitious standards for zero emission vehicles, and essentially forced auto manufacturers that wanted to sell cars in California to begin to create zero emission vehicles. And now the reason why they might be a little grumpy is because they'll say they're losing money on them right now. But then again, Prius lost money for a number of years before their Prius car became Toyota's biggest seller and biggest boon to their bottom line. So government policy drives entrepreneurial investment. It changes sort of the economic the metric that businesses will use when they're making decisions, and so I guess I'd suggest that in these coming years, in order for the United States to stay on the positive trajectory it's been on, we're going to need to see governors stepping up to the plate, making pledges, right, setting goals, but then also having that action plan, policies to help implement those bold goals. But also talking makes a big difference. Being at a bully pulpit talking about how we're encouraging entrepreneurs to participate in this economy, I think also makes a difference.
We're going to, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll open it up for discussion with all of you in the audience. As you look now at the role that you would say in the current context that you need or want to contribute to the ongoing discussion with the international community, what words of advice would you have, and how do you view the need from your leadership to help with that international dialogue going forward?
I guess what I would say is there's a tremendous opportunity to find co-benefits, right? So we're really truly one world, and when we think about, for example, nature-based solutions, and it's a little bit about what Brian was talking about, is the next place that we're looking is really how are we managing our rangeland, how are we managing our forests, how are we managing our farms. If we changed our farming and moved away from sort of the chemical-laden mega farm approach and really looked at how we're incorporating organic material into our soils, that would alone make a tremendous difference. And so I think as we're moving forward, the link between what we're doing in the United States and what's happening globally is understanding that as we're thinking about carbon markets, as we're thinking about how do we link our ambition with your needs and ambitions in other countries, is there a way we can take into account gains that could be made in developing countries in particular, where there's a tremendous opportunity to both create those carbon sinks and at the same time have that enhance the quality of life. One of the things that we're looking at in Vermont, because we're also a land-based economy, is that sweet spot where we know for Vermont, for example, we're almost 80% forested. We know if we lose our forests, then we're going to be much more vulnerable to floods, climate storms, climate-related storms, and it's going to impact water quality and ultimately water quantity. And that's multiple concerns that just keeping our forests really could make a difference with. At the same time, there are pests that are coming from other places because of climate change. They're invasive species that in the past couldn't survive. And so we're looking at innovative approaches to incent landowners to manage their forests sustainably with climate change in mind. And it could be that some of these models then would be helpful in other places. So, for example, we've got a new set of requirements that are necessary to clean up our Lake Champlain, which is our largest lake. It's polluted from nutrients, phosphorus, and as we think about the money we're spending to clean up the lake, there's ways to do that also have a carbon benefit and also helps our farmers or our forest landowners keep their forests. And so what we're thinking about is every time we're investing money, that we're doing it for multiple benefits, that it's going to make our communities safer, more resilient, that it's going to solve, help us with this pollution problem, and that it's also going to be greenhouse gas beneficial.
Very good. Ryan, do you want to comment on the word of advice?
Yeah, sure. I'll be very quickly. Three words of advice that I would offer. The first is learn from each other. One of the amazing things that is now happening because of the Paris process is that you have 195 countries all going through the process of developing NDCs and then taking from the developing to implementing, and the opportunity for partnership and learning in that process, I think, is extraordinary and largely untapped. The second is just to reinforce Deb's point, which is that to not view this the implementation process as zero sum. That in fact the collective implementation of NDCs in a region or globally will enhance the ability for any individual country to implement, because when you're talking about the same types of technologies and you're talking about the scale benefits and driving down costs, there actually is a tangible benefit from collective action in this space. And the third is, I think, to think ambitiously. We were here about, we were not here. We were at a COP a little less than a year ago, and the big question was, could the world come together and form the Paris Agreement? In the immediate aftermath of the Paris Agreement, nobody thought that it was possible for the Paris Agreement to enter into force this year. And here now we sit with the Paris Agreement having entered into force, more than 100 countries on board, more than 73% of emissions accounted for. And we also came together as a global community and reached an agreement on curbing aircraft emissions and a historic agreement to phase out HFCs all over the course of several months. And so, the path of fighting climate change is long, and it doesn't exactly go in a straight line. And the politics change globally and in different countries, but I don't think that that should keep those who are working on this issue from thinking ambitiously and then figuring out how to be creative and about how to get there, including some of these strategies that the other panelists are talking about.
Great. Deb?
So we don't, as a global business, we clearly believe that this is a continuing discussion for us everywhere where we operate in the world, and the urgency around it is one that I've already spoken to. It does not change our business plan, our business strategy, or our business trajectory. And yet we think that we have a unique role to play as global businesses because inherently through our design, we're cross-boundary, which is something that governments inherently are not and can only achieve then in partnership with others. So by being consistent in how we apply our strategies and our objectives globally, we firmly believe that we can contribute to the business objectives and agreements such as COP to help to deliver against these goals. I will say though that there's also huge value in collective action platforms, and there's many of those that are cross-boundary as well. There are some that will continue within the US, BICEP being a great example, where we'll continue to be able to partner with other businesses to bring that voice of leadership to these issues around climate. But when we look at cross borders, we think about the We Mean Business Coalition and the power that they've brought to business leadership and the voice of expectation and objectives in this space. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development and their low carbon technology partnership initiatives. Those have tremendous capacity to help deliver against these very global objectives with companies from all over the world in partnership with multi-sector and business in accomplishing those. Consumer Goods Forum even, in how they are making commitments around reducing the impacts of deforestation across these leading businesses globally. This collective action and these types of platforms will continue to increase in importance, I would suggest. And by participating there and working together against common goals, we will continue to achieve these objectives.
Terrific. We're going to now open up for questions, and I'd ask that as you ask your question, please identify yourself. If you need to make a brief statement, you may make a brief statement, but I will cut you off because this really is about questions and answers.
And Jennifer, if it's okay with you, we'll take like 3 at a time.
That's right,
Yeah,
and then
okay.
group them. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you. Carl Matheson from Climate Home. Brian and Deb, really, you've sort of projected this image of all the states that are coming together and perhaps picking up the slack of in the future or forging a new future. But of course, you're here representing Vermont, and Texas isn't here. Are we half the states have sued over this Clean Power Plan. Are we going to end up with a two-speed carbon economy in the US?
Two-speed carbon economy. That's the question. Okay. Want to move down the row? Yep.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Beal. I'm with climate scientist at Scripps Institution of Oceanography.
Please really speak loudly. It's a lot of noise in the background.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Charlotte Beal, and I'm a climate scientist at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I'm here with a group of young climate and ocean scientists, and we're happy to be here to see the scientific basis that the leaders at the state, federal, and business level have sunken their teeth into, and the actions that are the aggressive goals that are made. But we're also acutely aware of the evolving story of climate science. And we're really interested to see you as leaders are keeping up with the evolving story as you're developing your goals.
Okay, good. We'll take a third question. Alden?
Yeah, Alden Meyer, Union of Concerned Science, great panel. I've been struck over the last few years, the evolution of the North American carbon policy landscape. And Brian, you talked about the long-term goal plans going to be released tomorrow. There was also the Three Amigos Summit with the 50% clean energy and the methane. And Deb, you talked about the states. I was at a reception with Quebec and Ontario and California earlier this week talking about expanding that. I'm wondering if you can say what the change at the federal level in the United States might do to that increased integration of climate policy in North America, either at the federal or state level, and Diane, what that might mean for your operations on a North American integrated market.
Great.
Well, let me take a first swing at that, and the first first thing I will do is the necessary caveat, which is that I won't speculate on the policies of the incoming administration, and part of my role as being in government during this transition of power is not to do so, because we have a long history of doing so in the United States that has served us well as a country. So I won't speculate precisely about those policies, but I do want to offer a couple of perspectives on a couple of these points. The first thing is in Texas. It's funny that you raised Texas because Texas is a state that produces more wind power than any other state in the country. 20% of baseload power in Texas comes from wind, and there are peak days where they get half of their power from wind. So the clean energy revolution is coming to Texas, just like it's coming to other parts of the country. And so I think that the question is less, are we going to have a two-speed approach, although I like that analogy, and more, how fast is the speed going to be across the country? And in that respect, I do think it is worth stepping back and noting that, as the president has over the past week, that governing is different than campaigning, and there are a lot of challenges associated with moving forward your agenda. I've been working for President Obama since his first campaign in 2008. So I've been in the federal government for 8 years. And so I know well the challenges of moving, how slowly you can move sometimes when you're trying to reach your objectives. But I think that it's worth just reminding people in context that the Clean Power Plan is based on a dictate from the US Supreme Court that required the EPA to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. The Clean Power Plan itself is a very long-term mechanism. The binding nature of the Clean Power Plan rule doesn't go into effect until 2022. State plans are not actually due until 2018. And so if you look at the near-term trajectory of emissions reductions in the power sector, the Clean Power Plan is not driving that. So that's why, this two-speed I don't think is right. That over the near term, the things that are driving the carbon reductions in the U.S. power sector are relative price markets and the existing incentives, which are all sort of locked into current law. And the Clean Power Plan is a response to a requirement to regulate. And so that requirement to regulate persists under any scenario going forward. That is the law in the United States. And so I think that when utilities, state regulators, and we have one of the best here, and others look at the landscape and they look at the history of the Clean Air Act regulations, they're planning for a long term in which this is the trajectory both of the market and of regulatory policy over the medium term. So I think that that's worth just contextualizing. I think there's another interesting point here, just to tie this together, and I'll be quick, around Alden's point about regional partnerships, because I think this also goes to some of the dynamics that you're hearing about here. Some of the most interesting and impactful regional partnerships going on in North America right now are between U.S. states and either Canada or Mexico. And you're going to see market integration under any scenario. Again, I'm not going to speculate about the future, but the partnerships that we have pursued with both the Canadians and the Mexicans have been out of our shared economic interest in creating markets that create more market opportunities for U.S. businesses and U.S. workers. So I think there's a strong economic case to continue that partnership at the federal level as well. And then very last point on the climate science, look, I think one of the things that I think is refreshing about being in an international forum like this, but also spending time with the business community, is that in most pockets of the world, the business community, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and virtually every country in the world, that we've moved beyond the basic debates about climate science and are now focused on the evolution of climate science and trying to learn from it and incorporate that into policy. And one of the things that I think is most important about the Paris process itself, the actual structure of Paris, is a routine process for reporting, review, and updating. The opportunity to do global stock takes and then incorporate that information into national plans. And I think that provides a very valuable forum so that science can continue to be the basis that drives decision-making and ultimately policy choices at the national level.
So why don't I just add from the state perspective, I meet with my colleagues, the environmental secretaries and commissioners from around the country 2 or 3 times a year. And you're right, there are two different Americas, and we saw that with this election, right? And there are a number of my colleagues that will not use the word climate change. They're environmental commissioners, and that's because their governors won't let them. It's not to say, though, that they don't really understand the need to protect their citizens, their constituents, from air pollution, and that we operate in the context of the rule of law. And as you heard, greenhouse gases is a pollutant that we manage for. When the Clean Power Plan was appealed and then a stay was issued, there was a lot of soul searching among my colleagues for whom climate change is not already on the agenda, about whether or not they should be planning anyway and thinking about how they were going to meet their state obligation under the Clean Power Plan. And the vast majority of them did quietly move forward in making plans. Now, maybe that will change now, given the different direction of the federal government. But I guess in answer to you, yes, there will be some leaders in the states on climate change, and there will be some who will continue to resist. But I suggest that the major major contributors to greenhouse gas around the country are participating, and that's the more populated parts of the country, the West Coast and the East Coast. They're all some of the most ambitious states, making goals, following goals, even the ones who are no longer or not part of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas group, or the Western Climate Initiative. They still have adopted their own climate action plans with goals that are in a varying degree of ambition, but with some ambition. With respect to the future of sort of linked markets, and if that's what you were asking about, that was going to be complicated no matter who's president. And frankly, my hope had been that with the Clean Power Plan, it would encourage more states to join a market as part of their compliance mechanism under that statute. That still may happen, right? We've heard there's a long time period for the Clean Power Plan to be implemented. Meanwhile, Western Climate Initiative and RGGI are going to prove to the rest of the country that it is a really great mechanism for doing two things. One is reducing emissions, but also stimulating economic development. It's been a tremendous success in our states, in the RGGI states. So I think nothing speaks louder than actual success. So it's complicated. The programs are very complicated. And so linking is not easy. And so I would say that it's impressive to see how you may know that there's a number of Canadian provinces who have joined the Western Climate Initiative with California. But the way it's worked is California has put together a program. It's a very comprehensive program, and you can choose to join it, meaning that you take their program and make it your own. RGGI, it's more complicated because RGGI is a different program. We've got different stringencies. We've got a different cap. We've got a different cost containment reserve. It has a different kind of auction, or a similar auction, but there's different rules in the auction. And so blending the two is not necessarily an easy thing or an obvious thing. I think it's not bad to have a couple different models, though, and for not just other states in the United States to look at, but also the rest of the world as you're thinking about carbon markets in your own jurisdictions.
May I have just one additional example that I'd like to share? This is a program that was announced in August at the largest agricultural farm show in the country. It was led by Walmart. Kellogg Company was one of the primary partners, and many of the other supplier companies to Walmart were there as well. And it's a program called the Midwest Rowcrop Collaborative. This involves the Corn Belt states of the upper Mississippi watershed, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa being three of those states. And it's a program where it has multiple objectives. One objective is to help to reduce the dead zone in the Gulf, not a small task. Another one is to improve soil health in those states, in that corn and soy rotation belt. There are many other crops that are grown there, but they are the biggest. And these are quite conservative states, but when you start to talk about soil conservation and soil health, people are really keen and pay attention. That addresses water quality, but equally, it addresses the reduction of chemical inputs and the reduction of fertilizers, which in turn gets after reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which are a significant part of agricultural contributions to the climate issues. Now, never once was climate actually even mentioned in this initiative. It was never stated as an objective or as a goal. It was purely based on farming and engaging the agricultural secretaries and the environmental secretaries in those states, large corporations that source corn and soy and other key crops, rotation row crops from those states. and how we improve soil health and water quality. Will it address climate? Yes. Do we understand that? Yes. Does it have to be at the forefront of the discussion to achieve multi-state cross-sectoral partnerships? In fact, no. And conservation agriculture and these types of big partnership platforms will continue.
We have room for, I think, 3 more questions in our agenda before we ask our speakers to make closing remarks. So again, we'll pass the microphone and ask for comments and questions.
Hi, my name is Emily Weir. I'm with Yale University. As we are increasingly decarbonizing the power sector, transportation is emerging as one of the largest sectors of emissions in the United States. And transportation is an inherently granular issue that requires participation and funding and permitting issues at all different levels of government, from the DOT charging corridors for electric vehicles to charging infrastructure at businesses to state incentives to increase electric vehicles. So I'm wondering, how do you best work amongst yourselves and to coordinate across these different sectors to achieve these common goals, whether it be for transportation or other things, and making sure that everybody is kind of brought to the table and has a voice in these different discussions? Thank you.
2 more questions. We've got the microphone in the back there.
Hello. Oh. Hi, my name is Halston Sleets. I'm from the University of Minnesota, and I'm an environmental policy student. So my question, I wanted to hear a little bit more about stakeholder engagement and the active role that local government plays in engagement. I currently work at the county level in Minnesota, and I constantly see a lack of representation by domestic people of color. And it was previously stated that leadership matters, but so does representation. So what are some of your current initiatives, programs, or actions that enhance access to these conversations and increase representation of these groups within your organization or state level government?
Good. A 3rd question over here on the left.
Hi, my name's Una Fitzgerald. I'm with the Center for International Governance Innovation from Canada. And my question is whether you think that economic factors will shape future U.S. climate policy. And I'll give one example. Instead of the RGGI and the California programs, if you had a national price for carbon, you'd be able to put up a border carbon adjustment, and that way you could control imports that were dirty, dirty products coming into the country. So I'm just wondering, at the end of the day, do you think economics will be a factor in shaping your climate policy?
Okay.
I'm happy to start. I'll speak first to Emily's question about transportation emissions, and indeed there is a multi-state ZEV task force, and so I've got staff on working for me who is in a regular conversation with a number of our neighboring states, and actually we've got a task force that crosses over into Canada as well. We have a green corridor that takes ZEVs all the way, the infrastructure for recharging ZEVs all the way into Quebec. There's 8 states involved in this multi-state task force. It's along the whole corridor going down New England to the mid-Atlantic states, with the idea that in order to have a successful transition, there needs to be infrastructure in place. And it's not just charging, it's also signage, uniform signage, and then some uniform policies and as well as incentives. I would say, in Vermont, actually, half of our emissions is from transportation. And the challenge is that we're a small rural state. We don't have the mass for mass transit. So there's not it's hard to think about how we're going to help people move around the state, get to work, get to shopping, without some reliance on cars that families, maybe they own, maybe they car share. There may be different models of ownership of transport, but at the end of the day, it's going to be some sort of car that's taking you from one place to the next. We're also a really cold state. So it's going to be a car that's got to have a good heater and good tires, and we're an active state. It's got to be able to take a canoe. It's got to be able to have a place to put the buck when you get your buck, because it's hunting season right now. And So we're going to be relying on the auto manufacturers to continue to develop alternative fuel vehicles, electric vehicles in particular, that have longer, that can go further, batteries that'll take you further. But I would say the real problem is that when you're talking about transportation, unlike electricity, right? We just all turn on the lights and we leave it to the company that's providing the electricity to decide where they're getting it from. In contrast, when you're talking about transportation, it's a million different small decisions that individuals and families make. What kind of car to buy, whether to walk, whether to bike, whether to, whether to choose to live in a place where they could take the bus. And that's going to be a lot harder not to crack. It's going to require some significant cultural change and revisioning communities and and the sharing economy is also actually going to be part of it. There is already naturally some transition happening through the sharing economy, where I do feel somewhat optimistic. But I think we need a lot of good thinkers. You at Yale should spend some time being creative for us, because we don't yet have the answers for how this transformation is going to happen. We're still using that very old model where I have a car for my family, we do stuff with it, and but instead of going to the gas station, I plug it in. There's probably some transformative way of looking at transportation that will make a difference.
Great.
With respect to stakeholder engagement, this is where it would be very important to have cities at the table, because I do know some of my colleagues in our urban areas are thinking very carefully about how to engage the various communities to help think both about being able to take advantage of the new energy economy, but also how do you make communities resilient to the impacts of climate change. I know Boston has done, it's a neighboring state, has really focused on trying to bring the community in on a very localized level by having sort of neighborhood conversations particularly about resilience, and how to make sure that when the next superstorm Sandy hits, that the various communities within the city, including the populations that may be more vulnerable and less resilient for other reasons, are in a good position to withstand that storm. I think we could be doing a lot more thinking, though, about how to spread the benefits of the new energy economy from the sort of the traditional business entrepreneurs into more diverse communities.
Great. Our other two panelists like to comment on those questions?
Sure, I'll just be very brief. First, on the representation question, it's an important question. I'm glad you raised your voice on that. I'd say two things on that. The first is that I think if you look at the process by which we developed and finalized the Clean Power Plan, one of the things that I am proud of in that process is that the EPA and the administration writ large did more engagement, both in terms of taking in public comment and also then going into communities and hearing directly from people than has ever happened in the history of a federal rulemaking. And they went into communities across the country, urban communities, underrepresented communities, rural communities, college campuses, to try to get as much input as they could and design, and that actually impacted the design of the regulations. So there were specific things that we did about trying to focus energy efficiency and distributed renewable solutions for low-income communities that we might not have had we not gotten the full input from people throughout that process. So I think that that's an important thing that for the government to prioritize going forward. But the second thing that I would say is one of the things that we've learned about climate change as an issue, and I'm sure this you all have learned this in your lives, is that it's an issue that that is most impactful when it's brought down to a local level. And the most important, the most influential communicators on this issue are people for whom you have a relationship with, a friend, a family member, somebody in your community, and that this issue can easily get lost and people can easily tune out if what they're hearing from is just the federal government or the state government sort of, I'm here to help and that sort of thing. And so this issue, perhaps more than any other, because it is so large and slow moving in one sense, but also, poses an existential threat, is ripe for the kind of deliberate and dedicated organizing that many of you do in your communities, and there will need to be more of, because the most effective networks that have organized on climate change in the United States are, groups of moms who have gotten together in their communities to share experiences around, their kids having asthma. And you start to recognize there are certain communities and certain groups in the country that are much more susceptible to those risks. But that's a message that is most effectively worked and translated from the bottom up. And so I think we have to work on that issue from both perspectives. And the last thing I'll say very quickly on the transportation point, which is I think all of Deb's points are right about having to work at the local level. But this is also an example where effective national policy is really important, because the point that Deb raised earlier about California being out there and pushing the envelope, the consequence of them doing that was that the automakers didn't want to have a disparate regime of fuel economy standards with half of the states going one direction, half of the states going the other. That's a bad business environment to be operating in. So as a result of that, we were able to bring the companies together and set fuel economy standards. And the truth is, we just did a midterm evaluation of those fuel economy standards. And if you look at it, the auto companies are over complying with those standards at lower cost and greater levels of innovation. So it turns out they're getting more efficient vehicles at lower prices and better outcomes for consumers. So that's, when you look at the kinds of challenges of like, how do you bring mass transit to the state of Vermont, and having gone to college there, I'm sympathetic to that challenge. But part of this is having effective national policy that's actually going to drive innovation in the vehicle choices that are available for consumers. And the truth is now there's more than 100 models on the road right now that comply with the 2025 standards that are out there. That level of innovation would have been unthinkable 8 years ago. And now that's a market-driven trend that has the potential to continue.
Do you have any last minute question responses before
I'll
we
just
close?
speak to how happy I am that the issue of stakeholder engagement and diversity came up. It's a core value for us as a business, and ensuring that we've got a diverse and inclusive workplace and workforce and supplier base is core to how we operate and core to how we always look to engage with stakeholders in the US and beyond. What I would say on the transportation piece is I really wish that the folks from UPS and FedEx were here. They're doing some really amazing work in this space. We're looking at this concept of a sharing economy with our retailers and other consumer goods companies. Can we share the miles between warehouses and stores to reduce the number of empty trucks on the road? We've pushed as much as we can to rail. How do we take it further? What does that look like? It's going to take a lot of very innovative approaches, and we're looking for the types of partners that can help us get past those barriers to figure those out.
Great. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for staying and being such an attentive audience. We are going to wrap up at this point. I know there are other obligations our speakers have. Let me close by offering just a few reflections on what we've heard today. First of all, we've heard and acknowledged the uncertainty that we are all feeling as we look at a transition in the U.S. President-elect coming in. But we also recognize that there were three things that were really critical to bear in mind. First, that the economic transformation towards a clean energy economy is underway. We heard some early examples of that from states like Vermont that have now made investments in clean energy jobs and a clean energy economy that is on a road path to continue to expand. We've heard about the idea that states lead in their regulatory structures are already operating in positions of leadership, whether and if we move forward with a federal plan called the Clean Power Plan that will help bring those targets together at a national level. And we've heard that we're standing on the back of many business leaders and other stakeholders for whom this issue has not changed. We've heard that this is happening because it makes economic sense and because they believe fundamentally that this is a critical issue for them in both the terms of adapting their businesses and organizations to this new climate world and to think about how they contribute and how they engage with the stakeholders who they serve. So I'd like to thank the panel for your leadership, for the president who has gone further on climate and energy issues than any president in U.S. history, and to his administration that has worked so hard to bring this vision to all of us and bring forward the kind of outcomes that we saw last year and the outcomes that we're seeing in the United States. 20 years ago, we might have been in a very different position looking at the need for transformation. Today, we are in a strong position, and we thank you for that. Finally, I'd like to note that there are many things that we as a community can do to support local, state, and business action, and that by working together, we can continue to accelerate where we're going. And as our friend Rachel Kite from the Sustainable Energy for All initiative has said, going further, faster, together. So thank you for the panel. Thank you to the United States team for all of your leadership, and thank you all for attending.
Not done yet. While I was sitting there, I got an email from CQ about a call, and now we're on 3 new initiatives.
3 new initiatives.
You're not guys.
We got a lot left to do. It's good to see you. It's good to see you.
Thanks for doing it.
Yeah.
You guys, that was
It's great to see you.
It was great to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Were you a mayor? No, I work at the World Resources Institute.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, we made the video together. I was not there, unfortunately.
Yes, no, thank you for your Perfect.
Yeah, so I wanted to catch the person. Please go ahead. Let me also give you a card. With me, we're doing the women's constituency here. And I think your institute is doing a gender research thing.